I never expected to fall for my neighbor. And before you say anything, I know exactly how that sounds. I know it sounds like the start of something messy, something you'd shake your head at. But stay with me for a second because this isn't that kind of story. Or maybe it is. I honestly don't know anymore. What I do know is this. I'm not the kind of guy who looks at someone else's wife and lets his mind go somewhere it shouldn't. Never have been. I grew up watching my father treat people with respect, not because someone was watching, but because that's just what you do. Some lines exist for a reason. You see them, you acknowledge them, and you stay on your side. That's always been my way. So when Maya moved in next door, I did everything right. I smiled when I saw her. I helped carry a few boxes one afternoon when her husband's car wasn't in the driveway, and she was clearly struggling with a heavy shelving unit near the front door. I kept my hellos short and my eye contact normal. I was the perfectly decent neighbor. I was so good at it that I actually believed it myself for a while. Maya and her husband Daniel moved in on a Friday in late February. I remember because I had just gotten home from a long week and was looking forward to doing absolutely nothing that weekend. Then the moving truck showed up next door and that plan quietly dissolved. Not because I went out of my way to be involved. Just because moving days have a way of pulling everyone nearby into their orbit. Daniel shook my hand that first afternoon. Firm grip, direct eye contact, the kind of introduction that checks all the boxes without actually giving you much. He seemed like someone who was good at first impressions. He smiled, said they were glad to be in the neighborhood, and then his phone rang and that was more or less the end of that. Maya was different. She looked up from the box she was carrying, pushed her hair back with her forearm since both hands were full, and said, "Please tell me there's decent coffee somewhere nearby because we packed the machine last and I have no idea which box it's in." I laughed. I told her there was a small place 2 streets over that opened early. She looked genuinely relieved. Not politely relieved. Actually relieved. Like that was the most useful thing anyone had said to her all day. That was the first conversation. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Nothing special. Except that when I went back inside, I was still smiling and I couldn't entirely explain why. I told myself it was just the novelty of new neighbors. That's a reasonable thing to think. I kept telling myself reasonable things for the next several months. We became friends the way people sometimes do without really deciding to. It starts with small things that don't feel like anything while they're happening. She knocked on my door one evening in March to ask if I knew why the circuit breaker in her kitchen kept tripping. I came over and looked at it. Turned out she and Daniel had plugged too many high-draw appliances into the same circuit. I explained it quickly, fixed the issue, and was back at my own place within 20 minutes. Normal neighbor stuff. The kind of thing that doesn't mean anything. But then she showed up the next morning with a coffee from that place 2 streets over. Said it was a thank you. I told her she didn't have to do that. She said she wanted to. Then she asked what I actually did for work because she'd been curious since I mentioned something about load calculations the night before. I told her I was a civil engineer. Her face lit up in a way that caught me off guard. She said she was an architect. She said she'd been working on a redesign for a community center across town for the past 3 months and it had been driving her crazy because the original structural plans didn't match what was actually built. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of the building. I looked at it for maybe 4 seconds and spotted 2 things that would cause problems in 10 years if nobody addressed them. We stood in my doorway for 40 minutes talking about load paths and soil conditions and why certain older buildings were built the way they were. She was sharp. Not just smart sharp. The kind of person who asks the right next question before you've even finished answering the first one. I didn't notice the time passing until she looked at her watch and said she had to get back to her drafting table. After she left, I stood in my kitchen for a moment, and there was this quiet little alarm that went off somewhere in the back of my mind. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small, calm signal that said, "Pay attention to this. This is the kind of thing that grows." I paid attention. I just didn't do anything about it. Over the next few months, the conversations kept happening. Naturally, the way water finds its own path. A question over the fence that turned into 30 minutes. Running into each other at the coffee place and ending up at the same table for an hour. Her texting me a photo of a crack in her back wall asking if it was serious. Me telling her it was just seasonal settling. nothing to worry about. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind that don't raise any flags because taken individually, none of them mean much. But things don't exist individually. They exist in patterns. And the pattern was becoming very clear to me, even as I kept finding new ways to explain it away. I liked her. Not in a passing way. Not in a she seems nice and we get along kind of way. In a way that sat heavy and quiet in my chest every time I heard her laugh through the fence. In a way that made me aware of exactly which window in my house faced her side of the yard. I never said a word. Not one. Because she was married and Daniel mowed that lawn every Sunday and she wore that ring and the line was the line. I was good at holding it. Better than I knew. What I wasn't good at, what nobody ever is, was holding it forever. Here's something they don't tell you about being close to someone you're trying not to have feelings for. It doesn't get easier with time. It gets more complicated. Because the more you know someone, the more you see how their mind works, what makes them go quiet, what makes them come alive, the harder it becomes to keep what you feel in a neat, manageable box. You can tell yourself the same thing every day and still find, at the end of it, that the feeling hasn't moved. It's just sitting there, patient, waiting. That was my life for the better part of 8 months. On the outside, everything looked perfectly normal. Maya and I were neighbors who got along well. We talked over the fence. We ran into each other and grabbed coffee. I helped her work through a tricky structural issue in one of her building designs over email one afternoon, and she sent back this long, enthusiastic reply that I read 3 times. Normal stuff. Friendly stuff. The kind of thing that looks like nothing to anyone watching. Daniel was around, though less than you might expect. His job kept him busy in a way that seemed to suit him. He traveled a few times a month. He came and went with a kind of efficient rhythm that didn't leave much room for interruption. When he was home, he was pleasant enough, the occasional wave across the driveway, a brief conversation once about the construction work happening down the street. He was the kind of person who took up exactly the space he intended to and not an inch more. I noticed that Maya never talked about him much. Not in a bitter way. Not in the way someone does when they're unhappy and trying to hide it. Just he didn't come up. When she talked about her work, she talked about her work. When she talked about something funny that happened at the grocery store or a book she'd been reading late at night, it was just her in the story. He was present in the technical sense. He was in the house. But in the way that she talked about her life, there was a kind of quiet space where a partner usually shows up. I noticed that. I filed it away without meaning to, and I told myself it wasn't my business. What I couldn't file away was the Sunday in September that she mentioned months later, though I remembered it clearly even before she brought it up. Daniel had been inside watching something on TV. Maya was out in the backyard. Sitting on the low stone wall near the garden bed she'd been slowly putting together all summer. I came outside to check on the small raised bed I'd built along my fence line. Tomatoes that had done surprisingly well that year. We started talking through the fence the way we always did. Except that afternoon, something was different. Not in what we said. In how it felt. We talked for almost 2 hours. About her project downtown, about a neighborhood in Portugal she'd visited years ago and still thought about the way certain buildings make you feel small in a way that's actually comforting. She told me that when she was 12 she used to draw floor plans of imaginary houses in the margins of her school notebooks. I told her that when I was 10 I used to build small bridges out of sticks and rocks over the creek behind my parents' house and then stress test them by stacking larger and larger stones in the center. She laughed at that. Then she looked at me in this very direct, quiet way and said, "You've always thought about how things hold up under pressure, haven't you?" I didn't answer right away. Something about the way she said it landed differently than she probably intended. Or maybe exactly as she intended. I still don't know. When she went back inside that afternoon, I stayed outside for a few more minutes. The light was going golden the way it does in September, that particular late summer warmth that already has a hint of something ending in it. I stood there by my fence and I thought, clearly and without any drama, this is getting harder to manage. I didn't do anything with that thought. I just held it and went back inside. October came in cold and gray, skipping the gentle part entirely. I got busy with a big infrastructure project at work that was pulling long hours. I saw Maya less. The fence conversations got shorter. mostly because the weather pushed everyone inside earlier. I told myself that was probably good. A little distance was probably the sensible thing. Then came the Wednesday that shifted everything. I had come home late from the office, tired in that deep, bone-level way that makes even simple decisions feel like work. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, locked the car, and turned toward my front door. That's when I saw her. Maya was sitting on her front steps in the dark, still in her work clothes. A dark wrap dress, no jacket, arms wrapped around herself against the cold like she'd walked outside without thinking and just stopped there. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't doing anything. She was just sitting completely still, staring at the empty street ahead of her like she was looking at something nobody else could see. I stood by my car for a moment. Something about the way she was sitting made the tiredness in me go quiet. I set my bag back on the car seat. I walked over slowly, not rushing it. She heard my footsteps and looked up. I had seen Maya tired before. I had seen her frustrated and stressed and stretched thin by a deadline. I knew what her bad days looked like. This was not a bad day. This was something else entirely. This was the look of someone whose entire internal structure had just been removed without warning. And she was still sitting upright out of nothing but habit. Daniel left, she said. Flat. Still. Like she was reading a sentence out of someone else's story. I sat down on the step beside her without saying anything. Close enough so she'd know I wasn't going anywhere. The cold settled around us. Somewhere down the street a dog barked at something in the dark. She told me the shape of it in pieces. The bag that was already packed when she came downstairs that morning. His voice, calm and even like he was reporting a weather forecast, not ending a marriage. The door closing before she could find a single word to say back. And then later, the message she was never supposed to see that told her what she hadn't known, that this hadn't been a sudden decision, that someone else had been part of his life for a while. 3 years of marriage, packed bag, a closing door. I keep thinking I should be crying, she said quietly, but I just feel like I walked into a room and all the furniture is gone and I can't remember what used to be where. I knew exactly what she meant. That's what real loss does in the first few hours. It doesn't come in as grief. It comes in as blankness. Your mind goes still because it genuinely doesn't know what to do with information that big. I told her that. I told her the crying would come when her brain caught up with what had happened. That right now her body was just trying to keep her functional and that was okay. That was enough. She looked at me sideways. You're not going to tell me everything happens for a reason? No, I said. She exhaled slowly. Good. I really couldn't take that right now. We sat outside for a little while longer. Neither of us rushed it. The street stayed quiet. The cold deepened slowly, the kind that gets into your jacket by degrees, so gradually you don't notice until you're already thoroughly chilled. I didn't mention it. She didn't either. Eventually I asked if she'd eaten anything since morning. She thought about it like it was an unexpectedly complicated question. Then she said no, she didn't think she had. I stood up, held out my hand, told her she was coming inside. She started to object. That automatic reflex people have, I don't want to be a burden, I'll be fine, you don't have to. I just looked at her calmly and said she wasn't arguing with me about this. She looked at my hand for a moment. Then she took it. She stood up. She didn't let go right away. And I didn't either. She didn't let go of my hand until we reached the front door. I want you to hold on to that detail because I have thought about it many times since. Not in a dramatic way. Just, she held on until she didn't need to anymore. And then she let go quietly, the way people do when they've found solid ground again and can stand on their own. That small thing told me more about Maya than most full conversations had. Inside, my house was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Work bag by the door. A jacket thrown over the back of the couch. 2 unwashed mugs in the kitchen sink from that morning's coffee. Nothing impressive. But she walked in and something in her shoulders dropped slightly, like the air inside was easier to breathe than the cold outside had been. She stood in the middle of my kitchen and looked around slowly, not really seeing any of it, just landing somewhere. Finding a place to set down the weight she'd been carrying alone on those front steps. I didn't make a big deal of it. I moved around the kitchen the way you do when someone's in your space and you want them to feel like they belong there. opening a drawer, moving things quietly, keeping my hands busy so the silence didn't feel awkward. I ordered food from a Thai place 2 streets over that we had both agreed, during one of our longer fence conversations back in July, made the best curry within reasonable distance. I didn't ask her what she wanted. I just ordered the things I'd heard her mention before. She noticed that. I could tell by the way she looked at me briefly and then looked away without saying anything. I opened a bottle of red wine that had been sitting on top of the fridge for a few weeks. Nothing special. She didn't care and neither did I. We ate at the kitchen counter first. The food came quickly and we talked in short stretches with long pauses between. Not uncomfortable pauses, the kind that happen when two people are tired and honest and don't feel the need to fill every gap with noise. She told me a little more about the morning. Not emotionally, more like she was still assembling the facts of it, organizing the pieces into something that made a shape she could look at directly. Daniel had been distant for months, she said. She had noticed it. She had explained it away. Work pressure, a difficult season, the kind of thing married people do when they'd rather believe in a temporary storm than a permanent crack. She had been explaining things away for a long time. That's the part that hurt her most, I think. Not that he left. Not even that there had been someone else. It was the realization that she had seen the signs and chosen, quietly and daily, not to look at them directly. She felt like she had failed her own instincts, like she had let herself down before he ever got the chance to. I told her that wasn't a character flaw. I told her that was just being human. We protect ourselves from things that would hurt us. We choose hope over evidence sometimes because hope is the only tool we have that doesn't require us to burn something down. That doesn't mean she was naive. It means she was trying to trust the person she had built a life with. Those are two completely different things, and it matters that she understood that. She was quiet for a moment after I said that. Then she said simply, "I trusted him." Just those 3 words. No bitterness in them. Just the plain, clean fact of it, sitting there between us like something that deserved to be acknowledged without being explained. "I know," I said, and I meant it. We moved to the couch when the food was done. I put on the first thing I found on TV that wasn't news, which turned out to be some cooking competition neither of us had seen before. Strangers in white aprons panicking over timers and plating techniques and the structural integrity of desserts that had no business being as complicated as they were. It was exactly the right amount of ridiculous for the night we were having. She laughed once, really laughed, when one of the contestants tried something ambitious with a blowtorch and nearly caught his own sleeve on fire. It was sudden and unguarded and completely her. I laughed too, more at the relief of hearing it than at anything on the screen. We didn't talk about Daniel again for the rest of the night. Around 11 she said she should probably go home. She stood up slowly, looked around the room for a second like she was remembering where she was, and then looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. "Thank you," she said. Genuinely. I didn't want to be alone in that house tonight and I didn't know who else to call. I told her she could always call me. She smiled at that, small and tired and completely real, and said good night. I watched her cross back to her own front door and go inside. I cleaned up the glasses and the takeout containers, turned off the TV, stood in my kitchen in the quiet for a minute, trying to sort through everything I was feeling, and mostly failed. I went to bed around midnight. I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling. My mind was still moving too fast to settle. Car passed outside. Wind moved through the trees at the edge of the yard. Normal sounds. The kind that usually help me fall asleep. Not that night. Then, through the wall, I heard it. Faint. Barely there. But unmistakable. She was crying. Not loud, not falling apart. The kind of crying people do when they're sure no one can hear them. Small and careful and so deeply private that hearing it felt like accidentally seeing something I wasn't supposed to see. I lay completely still. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself she needed space, not company. I went through every reasonable argument I had while that sound kept coming through the wall, quiet and steady and absolutely gutting. Then it stopped. Silence. Long enough that I thought she'd fallen asleep. I closed my eyes. Then I heard my front door open. I hadn't moved. I was still lying in the dark, completely still, when I heard soft footsteps coming down the hallway. Not rushed, not hesitant either. Just quiet and steady. like someone who had made a decision and was following it through before they could talk themselves out of it. My bedroom door opened slowly. Maya was standing in the doorway. She had changed out of her work clothes into a loose top and dark joggers. Her hair was pulled back with a few pieces loose around her face. In the low light coming through the window, she looked younger somehow, quieter, like the night had taken something from her that hadn't been given back yet. She didn't say anything right away. She just stood there looking at me, and I looked back at her. Neither of us spoke for what felt like a long time but was probably only a few seconds. "I know this is strange," she said quietly. "It's not," I said. She looked at the floor for a moment, then back at me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I just couldn't be over there anymore. Everything is too quiet and I keep—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "Can I stay?" I pulled back the covers without saying a word and made room. She crossed the room and climbed in beside me. I became aware of everything at once. The slight shift of the mattress, the faint smell of her soap, something clean and simple. The way she settled onto her side facing me, knees drawn up toward her chest, hands tucked under her cheek like someone trying to sleep through a storm. We lay there in the dark, not touching, not talking. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping briefly across the wall, and then it was dark again. "Is this okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It's okay." I kept my eyes on the ceiling, kept my breathing steady, tried to be exactly what she needed in that moment, which was just present, just here. Nothing more complicated than that. Then she said something that I wasn't ready for. "Do you think there's something wrong with me?" I turned my head and looked at her. She was already looking at me. Her expression wasn't desperate or broken. It was worse than that, it was calm. Like she had been sitting with that question for hours and had finally just decided to put it somewhere outside herself. "No," I said. "There is nothing wrong with you." She held my gaze in the dark. Then why wasn't I enough to make him stay? Some questions don't need fast answers. They need real ones. I had learned that about Maya a long time ago. Someone leaving, I said, doesn't mean you weren't enough. It means they stopped trying. That is their failure, not yours. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked back up at the ceiling and let out a slow, deep breath. Something in her whole body seemed to drop, like she had been carrying a weight at shoulder height for hours and had finally let her arms come down. Her forehead came to rest against my shoulder. I put my arm around her slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to shift away if she wanted to. She didn't shift away. She pressed closer. The way you do when you've finally found something solid after a long time of reaching for things that weren't there. "I want to be honest with you about what the next few hours actually felt like. Not the version where everything is soft and simple and two people just quietly fall together like it was always obvious. The real version. Because the real version is more complicated than that, and it's also, somehow, more worth telling." We lay there for a long time without speaking. The ceiling fan turned. The neighborhood outside went fully quiet the way it only does somewhere past midnight when even the last few lights in distant windows go dark. I was awake. I don't know exactly when she fell asleep, but at some point her breathing evened out and the tension in her shoulders finally released and she was just still. Really still. The kind of still that only comes when a person has finally run completely out of fight and their body just takes over and says, "Enough. Rest now." I didn't sleep for a while after that. I lay there with my arm around her and stared at the ceiling and thought about how strange it is, the way important things actually arrive in real life. Not with dramatic music or a perfect moment or the exact right words said at exactly the right time. They arrive like this, quietly, sideways, on a cold Wednesday night through an unlocked front door, wrapped in exhaustion and grief and something else underneath that neither of you has named yet. I thought about the past 8 months. Every conversation over the fence. Every coffee that went cold. Every time I'd walked back into my house afterward and stood in the kitchen for a minute longer than I needed to. I had spent 8 months being careful. 8 months holding a line I had drawn for good reasons. And now she was here, asleep against my shoulder, and the line was gone. Not because I had crossed it, but because the situation that created it had quietly dismantled itself without asking either of us. I didn't know what that meant yet, I just knew it was real. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I finally fell asleep. When I woke, the room was still dark but different. That particular quality of darkness that comes just before things start to lighten outside. Maya was awake. Not sitting up, not restless. Just lying on her back with her hands folded on her stomach. Staring at the ceiling with her jaw set in that specific way I recognized. She was somewhere deep inside her own thoughts, working through something she hadn't put into words yet. I waited. I had learned to do that with her. After a moment she turned and looked at me. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yeah," I said. She took a slow breath. "There was a Sunday about 6 weeks ago. Daniel was inside and I was out in the backyard just sitting on the wall near the garden. You came outside to check on your raised beds and we ended up talking for almost 2 hours. She paused. "I went inside after," she said. "And I sat at the kitchen table and I thought, that felt more like home than anything has felt in a really long time. I kept very still. And then I felt terrible about it," she said. "Because I was married and you were my neighbor and I told myself I was just lonely. That it didn't mean anything. That I was reading too much into a conversation." She looked back at the ceiling. "But I wasn't, was I?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I wanted to say the true thing and I wanted to say it clearly. "No," I said finally. "You weren't." She let out a long breath like she had been waiting for someone to confirm something she already knew but hadn't been allowed to know yet. "I've been so careful," she said. "For so long. Careful about what I let myself feel. Careful about what I said and what I noticed and what I let myself want." She turned to look at me. "I'm really tired of being careful." Something shifted in the room when she said that. Not loudly. More like a pressure change. The kind you feel in your ears just before weather rolls in. Slow and quiet and completely certain. She moved closer. Not dramatically. Just closer. Her forehead came to rest against my shoulder and I felt her exhale warm and slow. I put my arm around her and she settled into it, and for a while neither of us said anything. Outside, the wind had picked up and I could hear it moving through the trees along the edge of the yard. The room was dark and still and felt separate from everything. Like a space between 2 chapters where the noise of both hadn't reached yet. "I used to wonder if it was just me," she said softly. "Whether I was the only one who felt like our conversations were different. Like they actually went somewhere real instead of just passing the time." "They do," I said. "You never said anything. You were married. There was a line. I wasn't going to cross it." She was quiet for a moment. "And now," she said. I looked at her. She was looking back at me with steady, honest, tired eyes. She wasn't asking me to fix anything or make any promises. She was just asking where I stood. "Now the line is gone," I said. "And I'm still here." She reached up slowly and touched the side of my face. Her hand was warm. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't filling the silence with words that didn't fit. She just looked at me like something had come into focus that had been slightly blurred for a very long time. "I've wanted to say this out loud for a while," she said. "I just never let myself." She kissed me first. Even after everything we had just said, I wasn't expecting it. She tilted her face up and closed the small distance between us and her lips met mine. For half a second I didn't move. My brain genuinely hadn't caught up yet. Then it did. She made this small quiet sound like relief, like someone finally setting down something heavy they had been carrying for far too long. When we pulled apart, we were both completely still. Her forehead rested against mine. I could feel her breathing. She laughed once, soft and short, and said, "I wasn't planning on doing that." "I know," I said. "Are you okay with it?" I pulled back just enough to look at her properly. "Lena, yes." She smiled. Small and tired and completely real. But then the smile faded slightly and her eyes went distant and I recognized that look immediately. She was thinking something she wasn't sure she should say out loud. "What?" I said. She sat up a little. I don't want you to think I'm here because I had nowhere else to go. I don't want this to be something I did because I was sad and scared and you happened to be close." I sat up too. Looked at her directly because she deserved that. "Is that what this is?" I asked. She shook her head without hesitating. "No, that's exactly why it scares me. Because it's not." "Then we're okay," I said. I just needed to say it out loud. "I know. I'm glad you did." She looked at me for a moment the way you look at someone when you're checking if they really mean something. I did. She must have seen that because her shoulders came down and she let herself breathe again. My whole life feels like a construction site right now, she said quietly. Everything is dug up and nothing is standing yet. I don't know what I'm building or how long it's going to take. That's okay, I said. You don't have to know tonight. What if it takes a long time? Then we figure it out slowly.
No rush. No deadline.
She looked down at her hands. I've never done anything slowly in my entire life, she said. I know, I said. I watched you redo your entire front garden in one afternoon. She laughed at that. A real laugh, surprised out of her. And the last bit of tension in the room broke cleanly, like a window opening and letting fresh air in. She leaned her head against my shoulder and we stayed like that for a while. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The first thin light of early morning was beginning to show at the edges of the curtains. Not full dawn yet, just a pale suggestion of it. The kind of light that says, something new is about to start, but there's no rush. Take a breath first. I'm going to have hard days ahead, she said quietly. The separation, telling people, figuring out the house, all of it. She paused. I'm not asking you to carry any of that. I'm not carrying it, I said. I'm just standing next to you while you do. She didn't say anything for a long moment after that. Then she tilted her head up and looked at me with an expression I will remember for a very long time. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just clear. Like someone who had been lost in fog for a while and had finally found solid ground under their feet and could feel which direction was forward again. Stay, I said. Not as a question, just as an offer. She nodded once. Okay. She lay back down and I lay beside her and she tucked herself close to my side like her body already knew the shape of this. I stared at the ceiling for a while longer, listening to her breathing slow and deepen until she was asleep again. Outside, the pale light kept growing, quiet and unhurried. When I finally woke for the last time that morning, she was sitting up against the headboard with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she had made herself at some point. She had made one for me too. It was sitting on the nightstand, still warm. She noticed me looking at it. I remembered how you take it, she said. I reached for the mug. Something passed between us in that moment. Not a word, not a gesture. Just a look that carried everything that the past 12 hours had been without needing to explain any of it. She leaned over and kissed me once. Easy and warm and unhurried. Then she turned to look at the pale light coming through the curtains. What do we do now? She asked. I thought about it honestly. We take today 1 hour at a time, I said. She nodded slowly, like that was the exact right answer and she had needed to hear it from someone outside her own head. She didn't look broken anymore. She didn't look like someone sitting in the wreckage of something. She looked like a person standing at the edge of a beginning, not certain of every step, not pretending any of this would be simple but steady, present, ready to take the first one. Some of the most important things in life don't arrive with noise or perfect timing. They arrive quietly, through unlocked doors, in the middle of ordinary nights. They sit down beside you without making a scene. And if you're paying attention, really paying attention, you recognize them not by how loud they arrive, but by how right it feels when they stay.